Well, last week, as we kicked off this whole series, I shared with you guys the history of the front porch. And I discovered something, and perhaps if you were here last week, you discovered something that I had no clue about. And that's the fact that the front porch is so unique to the United States of America. In fact, when you look at the origin that we talked about last week, the origin of the front porch, it's really started in the late 1800s. And during that time, the average American home, or pretty much all American homes, they didn't have electricity, they didn't have indoor plumbing. So as a result, the outhouse was in the backyard, the trash heap is in the backyard, so everyone gravitated to the front yard because you don't want to be in the living room. It's a little hot in there. And so people would go to their front yards, and then they started building these platforms, to cover up the mud and all the, things there. And then they began building, some coverings. And before long, the front porch was born. And people were envious of the front porch. I mean, it was the thing to have in America. I mean, if you had a house, you were like, man, I would love a front porch. And all kinds of houses, being built from the ground up, were now being built with front porches. Front porches were being added to houses. And if you had a front porch swing, whoo, you were someone. People were like, oh man, that's so rad, that's so cool. And the front porch, during the late 1800s and late 1800s and early 1900s, that was honestly, it was a place to be. It was a place to connect with your neighbors. It was a place to connect with your friends. It was a place to connect with your family members. It was a place to be and the place to be known. Because it was on the front porch that you would talk about the small things of life, like the weather, as well as the big things and the harder things of life. It was a front porch that you would dream together and share some celebrations and this was so cool. And the front porch was also the place that you would be honest and talk about perhaps some of the emotional storms of life. The front porch was where you talk about spiritual things and talk about God and here's what he's doing and also talk about your questions and doubts about God. I mean, ultimately, the front porch was a place to be seen, to be heard, to be valued. And over time, as you built these kind of front porch relationships with your friends and family members and neighbors and all that kind of stuff, over time, it was ultimately the place to be known. Like, this is the real me. But then things begin to shift. And things begin to change because in the 1920s, 50% of homes, they now have indoor plumbing and, electricity. So now the bathroom moves in. You now have AC. All these, TV comes along. And before long, we go from the front porch to the living room. And then fast forward some years later, and we go from the living room to the back porch. Because now on the back porch, you have pools and you have outdoor fire pits and you have outdoor, TVs and outdoor plumbing with bathrooms and, showers and all these wonderful things. And those things are great. I think that's awesome. But here's the thing we talked about last week. Over the last 100 years, we've seen the shift from the front porch to the back porch. And not only have we seen that shift, but along with all the prosperity, all the bigger homes, all the cars, all the technology, all the phones that were more connected than ever, along with the shift from the front porch to the back porch, we've also seen a shift, according to every piece of research, that today we are more isolated and lonely than ever before. And as we talked about last week, that not only has an emotional impact, but that also has a psychological and a physiological impact. And I showed you the research out there and all the things that it's doing to your physical health, your biology, what's happening. It is robbing you of life. And so I said, guys, the reason why we're doing this series, the reason why we're spending a couple weeks talking about this is because one of the greatest decisions you and I could make, regardless if you're a follower of Jesus or not, one of the greatest gifts we could give ourselves is to intentionally take a step and begin to prioritize the front porch in our lives. Because if you're willing to be courageous, if you're willing to be brave, if you're willing to step into these intentional relationships, here's the thing we know it leads to. It leads to the number one thing we long for. It leads to that we make so many decisions and so many sacrifices because what we're hoping to achieve, what we're hoping to experience in life is happiness. A very simple definition of happiness is the experience of joy, contentment, or positive well-being combined with a sense that one's life is good, meaningful, and worthwhile. I mean, isn't that what you want in life? Isn't that why you're making the decisions you're making in life? Isn't that why you're sacrificing so much in life? Because, man, I just want to experience, not short-term, not a shot of happiness. There are a lot of things in life that can give us. But this lasting, long-term, sustained joy, contentment, meaning, and happiness in life. And here's the thing you've got to know. This is fascinating stuff. Is according to the most comprehensive and longest running study on happiness, it's been over 80 years of study. It's called the Harvard Study of Adult Development, which today the director of the Harvard Study of Adult Development is this guy. That's Dr. Robert Waldinger. He shares this research and he talks about this study on a TED Talk. And I would highly recommend, it's a TED Talk from about 2 or 3 years ago, highly recommend it. And in the TED Talk, he says, here's what the research provides on the most comprehensive study of what leads to happiness in your life. He says this, he says, what makes a good life? Isn't that what we want? Man, I want the good life. We want the good life. What makes the good life? He says, lessons from the longest study on happiness say that while many young people tend to think that fame, fortune, and hard work will bring them happiness, it's actually our social connections that are most important for our well-being. In other words, if you really want to experience that in life, if you want to say not short-term, not a shot of happiness, but something in life that leads to sustained, long-term joy, contentment, that positive energy, that meaning and purpose, according to all the most objective research we have, one of the greatest gifts you could give yourself, one of the greatest decisions is to go, I'm going to do it. I'm going to begin to step in and intentionally prioritize the front porch in my life. And we talked about that last week, and I even gave you an opportunity to take that step. And so guys, if you weren't here last week, I really want to encourage you. You can go online, you can listen, you can watch, and catch up on what we've said so far. Now today, in this very short 2-part series, we're going to be wrapping up this series. Today, what I want to talk about are front porch relationships. And specifically, I want to talk about these front porch relationships, which are these relationships of trust, these relationships of influence, these relationships where you're valued, you're seen, and you're heard. I want to talk about the fact that front porch relationships influence the direction and quality of your life. That every arena, every aspect of your life is being influenced by and directed by these front porch relationships. Now, to begin to kind of unpack this or begin to frame this, here's what I want to do. I want to show you something that I was working on this week. And in fact, this week I was actually drawing a picture of you. And so here's a picture of you. You're actually right in the center. You see yourself? Look at that. Now, you know I can't see the world outside of spiked hair, so that's the way I picture you. Everyone has spiked hair. And you look beautiful, by the way. You look fascinating. Anyways, so there you are, imagine. And these are relationships in all of our lives, again, regardless if you're a follower of Jesus or not. And this isn't a comprehensive picture. This is just getting us thinking. And keeping with the symbolism of like these front porch relationships, here's what I know about you and what I know about me. Is that in all of our lives, we have these relationships who are called across the town relationships. And think of these like, maybe that extended family member, maybe that aunt or somebody at work that you occasionally see, or somebody at school you occasionally see, or somebody in your neighborhood that you bump into, right? These are kind of those across town relationships. And then we have a different kind of relationship. We have these sidewalk relationships. And these would be people you may even call your friends. These are like, hey, I hang out with them. These are people at work or people at school or people in our neighborhood, or maybe, on that sports team of your son or daughters that you travel with those other parents and you hang out at the pool and have fun with. Those are kind of your sidewalk relationships. And then we get to that inner circle, which are these front porch relationships, these most trusted relationships. In other words, think of it this way. How many of you guys have seen the movie Meet the Fockers? Anyone? Classic. Look at all of us. So many of us have seen. Well, do you remember in the movie Jack, who's the father-in-law, ex-CIA guy, and his son-in-law Gaylord? Remember that? And their interaction? Well, there's one scene, and I'm not going to get this, verbatim, but there's one scene where Jack looks at Gaylord, and he says, Gaylord, there's a circle of trust, and you have not made it into the circle of trust. There's only a few in this circle, right? Remember that scene? Well, that is a front porch relationship. It's those few individuals that make it in that circle of trust. That's it. Now, here's the thing, guys. And this is the thing perhaps we lose sight of, or this is the thing that we become a little bit apathetic about. What you need to know, what we all need to know when it comes to front porch relationships, is they're not neutral, not even close to neutral. That front porch relationships, they either work for us or against us. They absolutely influence the direction and quality of your life. They influence the direction and quality of your marriage, the direction and quality of your dating relationships. They influence how you see the world and social issues. They influence how you see money and how you handle your finances. They influence every aspect of your life, including these front porch relationships. Not only influence our relationships and our morality and our finances, and pick whatever other category, but they also influence faith. That the direction and quality of our faith is so influenced by these front porch relationships. Now, a real quick side note. When it comes to faith, faith is not feelings. And this is really important. And maybe you've come to Northpoint and you've heard this before, which is great, because my hope for every one of us here and those of you watching or listening online is that for the rest of your life, you never think about faith and feeling, faith and feeling. That is not faith at all. That's not even a category of faith. Faith is always confidence in, trust in, based upon the evidence. You use it every single day of your life. You get in your car based upon faith. You get on an airplane based upon faith. You make decisions in business based upon faith. Based upon the evidence, I'm going to trust in. Based upon the evidence, I have confidence in. That's faith. And guys, I'm just telling you, your faith, the direction and quality of your faith is so influenced by who is on your front porch. And as a pastor of Northpoint for over, a decade of my life, when I hear faith stories, people going, man, I put my trust, my confidence in Jesus Christ. Not one time have I ever heard a faith story of someone saying, man, I put my confidence, my trust in Jesus Christ when I was out in the desert. When I was totally isolated. That's where God became alive and this vision and this whole thing. Now listen, I'm not against the desert experience. I'm not saying that doesn't play an important role in our faith, but oftentimes this desert picture is reserved for Hollywood. Like Hollywood says that's where you really, discover who God is. Or it's reserved for individuals like Matthew McConaughey, who I respect greatly, but in his book he talks about, this solitude and all this kind of stuff, and that's really where he begins to think. Now, there's absolutely a place for that, but I'm just telling you, in my experience, as a lead pastor, I've heard hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of stories of people putting their confidence, their trust in. Every single time it had to do with a relationship. I mean, the stories of faith I hear all the time are stories like my mom. There's my mom right there. Look at how beautiful she is. If you've come to Northpoint, she passed away about 10 years ago from cancer. And my mom's story, which I've shared parts of, when she was 16 years old, she was pregnant by my dad with my sister. And as a 16-year-old teenager pregnant, you can imagine she was scared to death. I mean, she's like, what do I do? And how can I ever be a mom? And oh my gosh, she was freaking out. So she did what I think is a wonderful thing. She was like, I'm gonna turn to the church and I'm gonna sit down and meet with a pastor. So she met with a pastor and she said, I'm 16, I'm pregnant. Here's what's going on. How does God view me? What's my way forward? I'm scared to death. I have no idea how to be a mom, all this kind of stuff. So what do you think? And the pastor looked at her and said, well, Linda, because you made a decision to have sex before marriage and now you're pregnant, from God's perspective, you're going to hell. That's what she heard. And so she walks out of the church, and not only did she walk out of the church, but she became anti-church and anti-religious people. And that's why when I share my story, the first 12 years of my life, I grew up in a home, I never went to church. Like literally never. Not for Christmas, not for any special occasion, not for Easter, never, because my parents were anti-religious people, anti-church, because those are the people who hurt people. Those are the people who are hypocrites. That's the organization which is all about power and control. And that's what I grew up in. And then about 15 to 20 years after my mom had that interaction with that pastor, she met another person. And this individual's name was Mary Hanks. And Mary Hanks was in business, and my mom's in business. My mom's very driven, want to be successful and all this kind of stuff. So Mary invited my mom to this leadership lunch and how to become a better leader. And so my mom accepted, went to this leadership lunch. The keynote speaker talked about Jesus, one of the greatest leaders of all time, and some leadership principles. And the keynote speaker began to talk about grace, amazing grace, unmerited favor, the unconditional love of God through Jesus Christ, that God, through Christ, loves you unconditionally as you are, not as you should be, because none of us are as we should be. For the first time in her life, she heard about grace. She heard about unconditional love. through those relationships, my mom put her confidence, her trust in Jesus Christ. And then my mom started meeting with Mary. And she had all kinds of questions for Mary. Mary, what about the Bible? What about prayer? Where does that fit in? That's weird. Why would I pray to God if he already knows? And, all these questions about what's going on around the world. And I remember at that time, my mom would come home after meeting with Mary, and my dad was the antagonist, and my sister and I loved to kind of get in my dad's camp, and we would make fun of my mom all the time and go, you're such a weird religious person. You're going to be selling Bibles at the airport. I mean, this is going to be weird, Mom. Like, what are you doing? And eventually, over time, my dad became a follower of Christ. My sister became a follower of Christ. And then I became a follower of Christ. And if you look at that faith story, you would go, that was a result of a relationship. And Mary Hanks had such an influence on the direction and the quality of my mom's faith. That's the stories I hear all the time. I mean, it's stories like Jeff's that we heard 3 weeks ago. I mean, he's got an incredible story. If you were here 3 weeks ago, he was right there. He's getting baptized. I mean, I love Jeff's story. He was like, man, I was out of church for 40 years. For 40 years, like this distance, there's 40 years from my head to my heart. Like, I knew there was something, but there's no relationship for 40 years. Then through relationships, somebody invited him to Northpoint. Then he got involved in Starting Point. And he met with these, people who he considered these religious people or Jesus followers. And I love what Jeff said in his story. Jeff said, as I'm on the other side of these, Christ followers, like I had this perception. And he said, I thought they were going to be, his word, goobers. And then he said, it was quite different. And he began to trust a Christian for the first time in his life. And you listen to his story, and his story was, as a result of these people, these invitations, these relationships, it impacted the quality and direction of my life. The point is, and the principle is, in every arena of our lives, and we know this, that these front porch relationships, that they will influence the direction and quality of our life, and front porch relationships, they are not neutral. They will influence your life one way, your marriage one way, your relationships one way, your morality one way, or the other. It's a principle that we teach our kids. And we know it as a mom or dad. If you're a parent, you see this principle lived out with your sons and daughters you love the very most. Well, guys, that's not only true in their lives, it's true in every single one of our lives, regardless if you're a follower of Jesus or not. Now, here's the thing I love, and this is one of the things I love about the Bible. This is so cool. You see, what we experience in life and what we see in life, it's reiterated time and time again in the scriptures, in the Bible. In fact, one of the individuals who is one of the most wealthy individuals who lived about 3,000 years ago, one of the most influential individuals in this world, one of the most powerful individuals you can imagine, one of the most, kind of the intellectual kind of individuals, but also just wisdom of life kind of individuals that have ever lived about 3,000 years ago. His name is Solomon. Solomon was the third king of the nation of Israel. And Solomon, this is kind of cool, Solomon with all of this intellect, all of this power, all of this wealth, in fact, in today's wealth, he would have a multiple trillions of dollars equivalent. I mean, this guy had so much wealth, so much power, so much prosperity, so much influence. And as a father, he sat down one day and he said, I want to write a letter to my sons. It's called the Letter of Proverbs. And all these observations and all this experience I've made in life, I just want to capture this for my sons because I want to pass this to them. So he sits down, he writes this letter of Proverbs that's not only applicable to his sons, whom he loves the most, but it's also applicable to your life and my life. And look at what he says. He reiterates the principle we're talking about. I love this. Proverbs chapter 13, he says, one who walks with a wise people will be wise, but a companion of fools will suffer harm. In other words, according to Solomon, that a wise person knows the difference between right and wrong. A wise person knows the difference between what's wise and unwise and chooses what's wise. But equally so, according to Solomon, a fool knows the difference between wise and unwise, what's right and wrong, and chooses what's unwise. According to Solomon, a wise person understands that all their emotions, here's my feelings and here's my desires and here's my emotions, that a wise person understands that I'm to take all of those and submit those to my Heavenly Father, who is for me and not against me. A fool says, really? I'm going to do what I want, when I want, with whom I want. Whatever makes me happy, according to Solomon. According to Solomon, a wise person understands that maximum freedom, joy, contentment, meaning in life is found in the design of God, in the creation of God, in the values of God. And I'm going to take my life in the best of my ability, align it with God's design. But according to Solomon, a fool says, did God really say? I don't really care. I'm going to do what I want. Now, here's the thing. Solomon, with all of this influence, all of this power, life experience, observations, he's writing this letter to his sons. And he's going, man, one of the greatest pieces of advice I can give you is one who walks with the wise. If there are wise individuals on your front porch, sons, I'm just telling you, you will grow in wisdom. You will step into what you so long for, which is that contentment, joy, satisfaction, meaning, and purpose, happiness in life. But equally so, sons, you need to understand that if there are fools on your front porch, if you allow fools in your front porch, then you also need to understand that a companion of fools will suffer harm. That life may be fun in the short term. You may have a shot of happiness and, oh man, this is great. But man, life will become more and more and more complex. It's a principle. You either break your life against or you step in with this principle. And guys, here's what's true, is I've experienced this in my life. I've seen this in my life. I've had so many front porch relationships in my life, and I think about the influence and the direction and the quality of my life. For example, somebody who's currently on my front porch today, and has been on my front porch for many, many years, his name is Barry Cox. In fact, here's a picture of Barry. He's one of my best friends, and there he is. And Barry and I, we've known one another for many, many years, well over a decade. And Barry and I have experienced some really cool mountaintop experiences, and we've experienced some really, really difficult things. We have celebrated together and, belly laughed together, and we have shed tears together because of how hard life can get at times. Barry and I, we have celebrated a lot of fun things in life, and we have fought like cats and dogs. If you know Barry's personality and my personality, we can clash, and I'm just telling you where things are happening. But he's one of my best friends, and he's a guy I've hung out with for a long, long time. He's on my front porch. And not only is Barry, but Barry's wife, Amber, and my wife, Jill, we've hung out together. We've created a lot of memories. In fact, here's a picture of us in California. Went on vacation together. We had a great time together. Just one of those guys that I'm just going, man, he is on my front porch. And some insight, just a little bit of side note, something Barry and I have talked about for, 5, 6, 7 years, is him actually getting a tattoo. He's never had a tattoo, and he's like, Buck, I'm thinking about getting a tattoo. And 2 weeks ago, he finally got his first tattoo. You guys want to actually see it? Here it is. His first tattoo is right here. This next slide, voila. There's the big revealing. And so he got this big tattoo of storms and a boat and this great phrase right here. And I thought, man, this was so cool. I was, he was, a little bit nervous, and we were talking about this. And if you've been here at Northpoint a while, I also have one single tattoo. And he and I were comparing our tattoos. And so I just want to show you what we were comparing, because I think my tattoo's pretty strong and masculine. Here's my tattoo right here. Very strong. Powerful right there, right? Back in college when I wasn't thinking too straight, got this tat right there. So anyways, I'm feeling quite insecure. Let's go back to Barry's tattoo because it has much better meaning. So here's why Barry got this tattoo, because, you can look at it first and you're like, are you in the Navy? Like, what's going on here? But here's the deal. In Barry's life, what I know to be true on the other side of him is he's experienced some pinnacles in life, mountaintop experiences that most of us will never experience in our life. He's equally experienced some of the darkest valleys that any individual will ever experience in their life, that most of us will never experience. On the other side of Barry Cox, I'm here to tell you, he is a faithful man. On the other side of the peaks and the valleys, he has been faithful. And his faithfulness has allowed him to see how God has used all the things in his life for the good, to shape him into a man, to shape him into a husband, to shape him into a father, to shape him into a friend who has wisdom, that God used every piece of it. And that's why it says what it says right here. A smooth sea never made a skilled sailor. He's able to make that statement in some of the most amazing things of life and some of the hardest things you'll ever experience in life because of his faithfulness and his wisdom. And he's on my front porch. And several weeks ago, Barry and I were meeting, and we meet for a lot of different reasons, but in this particular case, we were meeting because Jill and I were in a pickle. And Jill and I had just had a fight like 2 nights before, and we were just not in good space and, all this kind of stuff. So I was telling Barry about this, and I was like, Barry, here's the deal. Here's what's going on, and, here's what Jill's doing. And, this has been something that for many, many years, it's just keeps happening. And I saw it the other night. Man, I'm so angry about it, and I'm so hurt about it. And I'm just going on and on and on about Jill. And Barry's a very patient man because he knows I like to talk. So, he's just sitting there the whole time. And then I get done, and he looks at me. He says, my friend, your spouse is not your problem. Your spouse has simply revealed the problem in you. And my initial emotional response, I wanted to reach across the table and give him a little slap, I want to be like, what are you saying? I mean, do you not care about my feelings and what Jill did and how hurt I am and, all this stuff? I wanted to do that. But I have trust with this guy. He's a guy of wisdom. So I thought about it, and I'm glad I did. Because over the course of the day, I realized that Jill and I, what we were fighting about had nothing to do with the fight. It had to do with some things in our past that still had a lot of energy inside of me that I haven't processed as well as I thought I have processed. And they were showing up in this fight, and therefore, I wasn't listening to Jill, and she was trying a different approach, but I just couldn't see that because I was being triggered because of what happened in the past, and I was saying hurtful things to her. I'm just telling you, I wouldn't have come to that epiphany, I wouldn't have come to that knowledge without Barry on my front porch. And he is an influence that determined the direction and quality of my marriage. Now, imagine this. Imagine if Barry wasn't on my front porch. Imagine if another individual was. And I sat down with that other individual and I said, well, let me tell you everything that went on. And man, this has gone on for years and years and years. And gosh, it's so difficult to see and it's so hurtful. I shared this whole thing, and that other individual looked at me and said, well, Buck, sounds like you're not happy. Man, don't you want to be happy? This has gone on for a long time, and you've tried, and you've tried, and you've tried. Maybe it's time to find the right person. You've tried real hard, but maybe it's time to find a different person, because that person will make you happy. You see how front porch relationships can influence the direction and quality of some of your most important things in your life? And that's Solomon's point. The principle Solomon is teaching you and teaching me that's so relevant in every single one of our lives. He's saying, listen, one who walks with wise people will be wise, but a companion of fools will suffer harm. So the natural question that I want to ask you, and I really want you to be honest about this question, and I want you to think about this question. Who's on your front porch? As you think about your life, and again, let's go back to the illustration. I'm not talking about these across-town relationships or sidewalk relationships. Those are wonderful relationships. I'm talking about those in that inner circle on your front porch. Who's on your front porch? Who's those individuals who have a lot of influence on some of the most important things in your life? Because what you need to know, and I hope you never lose sight of, they're not neutral. They're never neutral. They work for you or against you. So let me just ask, more specifically, when it comes to the people on your front porch and when it comes to your marriage, if you're married, are they for your marriage or are they pulling you away from a healthy marriage? When it comes to the individuals on your front porch or, maybe your girlfriends and that maybe you have a glass of wine, once or twice a week and you hang out. I mean, are they bashing their husbands and your husbands and this is so terrible and all this kind of stuff pulling you away from what a healthy marriage looks like? Or are they saying, man, this is tough, and they're empathizing with you, but they're talking about how to honor your husband and what it looks like to have intimacy, relational intimacy in a marriage? When it comes to your guy friends and those guys on your front porch, are you hanging out with them, and are they taking you to environments where you're perhaps flirting with the waitress, or flirting with those around, or talking about those girls and kind of sexualizing that whole thing, and man, one day, someday? Are they looking at you as a man, as a husband, and saying, hey, can we talk about what it looks like to discover and stay curious about your wife? Because your wife is Lady Wisdom, and she has so much incredible insight in every aspect of life. How can we together encourage one another to discover those things? Who's on your front porch? Because they will influence one way or the other your most important relationships. Or when it comes to God, think about God. Are the people on your front porch, are they encouraging you and inspiring you and making Jesus more relevant in your life because of the times that you're having with one another? Or the people on your front porch, they're like, oh, come on, let's go are you serious, church again? Church is all about, hypocrisy. All they want is your money. It's all about the power. Are you kidding me? What are people on your front porch? Who's on your front porch? And are they encouraging you with your relationship and allowing your relationship with Jesus Christ to be more relevant or less relevant? How about love? Love. Talk about a confusing term today. Love. Yes, love is affirmation and acceptance. That's an aspect of love for sure. But the core, the foundation of love is acting on the objective best interest of someone, whether they agree or disagree. That's love. As a parent, you absolutely know what I'm talking about. What makes something objective? As a follower of Jesus, what makes it objective is our Heavenly Father. And God has spoken. There's a value system here that we pull from this objective value system of our Heavenly Father, and we take that into a relationship on the front porch, and that's what we encourage one another on. And that is love by definition. One of my favorite verses of all time, Proverbs 27, says this: wounds from a friend can be trusted, but an enemy multiplies kisses. Having a bunch of people on your front porch telling you exactly what you want to hear. Hey, you want to be happy? Go for it. Do whatever. I'm going to accept it. I'm going to affirm it. Go for it. Do it. Man, we've got to have some berries on our front porch that look at us and say, hey, listen, I hear what you're saying, but your spouse is not your problem. Your spouse is revealing your problem in you. That's hard to hear, but those words can be trusted from a friend. When it comes to money, the people on your front porch, are they influencing you to embrace the things Jesus taught about money? You remember, Jesus said there's no greater competition for your heart, the security and passion of your heart, than money. And Jesus was very clear. You got to pick between God and money. Are the people on your front porch encouraging you to embrace the teachings of Christ when it comes to money, or to embrace the teachings of what our current modern teaching tells us? When it comes to morality, what's good and bad value systems? Are the people on your front porch, are they encouraging you to embrace the morality of your Heavenly Father, embracing you to do the exact opposite? We could go on and on. But the point is this, is that the people on your front porch, they will influence the direction and quality of your life, and they are not neutral. They are for or against. And let me just say two quick things with the context of what we're talking about today. If you're here today and you're not a follower of Jesus, the examples I just gave were very much for followers of Jesus Christ. And if you're not a follower of Jesus, I so love the fact that you're here, you're watching or listening online. But what I know about you is you have a value system. And this is a principle. And with whatever your value system is, I think there is an awareness that needs to happen. To go, who's on my front porch? Are they helping me embrace my values? Or are they pulling me away from what your values are? And the last thing is this. Guys, I'm not talking about writing people off. Are you kidding me? These people, I'm going to write them off. And there's sidewalk relationships. There's, across town relationships. As a follower of Jesus Christ, we dare not write anyone off. And do you know why? Do you know why? The number one command Jesus gave you and I as a follower of Jesus Christ is what? Love me. Love one another as I have loved you. Jesus never wrote us off. I'm not talking about writing people off. I'm just talking about being aware of this question of who is on your front porch, because they will influence the direction and quality of every aspect of your life. So guys, here's the thing. According to the research, today, as I quoted, we're more isolated and lonely than ever before. And according to the research, there's a lot of front porches that are empty. That you go out on the front porch and there's no one there. And if that's you, if there's no one on your front porch, or if you begin to realize there are people on the front porch that are working against your value system, and you're going, well, where can I find front porch relationships? Where can I begin to do this? Well, this is why, as a church, we want to do everything we can to partner with you. I can't make you get into front porch relationships. I can't force a front porch relationship to happen. I mean, here's a berry in your life. I can't make that. All we can do as a church is create the best possible environments to create the highest probability for you to begin to build trust and be seen and heard and valued and known and develop those front porch relationships that will impact the rest of your life. So what we've done as a church is we tried to create as many environments as possible for that probability to increase for you to engage in front porch relationships. So here's what I want to do with our last 2 minutes, and we're going to go quickly here, is I want to ask you to do what we did last week, and we're going to end our time this way. Last week, I asked you to get your phones out and scan the QR code on the back of your seats. And if you're not a QR code person, or you're like, how do I do that? There's a website right up here called npaustin.com/frontporch. And so I want you to get your phones out. I want you to scan that QR code. I want you to type in this website. And if you already did this last week, you don't have to do it this week. This is just for those of you who said, man, I would love to take a step, get in an environment where perhaps I can engage in the front porch. So if you can, I'll give you about 20 seconds. Pull your phones out, scan that QR code, type this website in, and I'll kind of walk you through what's next. Is the internet working pretty good? You guys able to pull that stuff up? Voila. Okay, here's the deal. So once you scan the QR code or go to that website, it should kick back a form to you. So it should look like something like this. And on this form, the first page is simply just your contact information and your preferred method of being communicated with. Again, we're not here to spam you. We're really here to partner with you. So if you would, fill that out. And then you scroll down to the next page. And on the next page, there's different kind of groups. There's men's groups, women's groups, couples groups, college groups, young adult groups, short-term groups. Just to give you a little context here, when it comes to short-term groups, there are groups like Starting Point, the group I talked about with Jeff. And if you're here, you're watching online, and you're like, Buck, I get the whole God thing, but how does the God move from my head to my heart? Like, you talk about a relationship, I haven't experienced that. Well, Starting Point is a fantastic place to begin to ask questions, to be curious. How does God and that relationship move from my head to my heart? Or here's some questions I have. It's a wonderful environment for that. We also have groups like Marriage Matters. Marriage Matters is a great short-term group. We have for, just figuring out, hey, are there other people, in a marriage that I can partner with on the front porch who can help me and where my marriage is at? We've got groups like Oasis. Oasis is about divorce care. If you're going like, man, I feel so lonely, I have no idea what the next steps are because the emotional fog is so heavy. Oasis groups are great. Groups like Parent Connect. Parent Connect are for parents of sons and daughters who are part of the LGBTQ plus community. It's like, well, I've got questions. How do I love? What does love require of me? How do I engage in all these things? It's a fantastic group to develop those front porch relationships. So there's a lot of short-term groups. So go ahead and click one of those. And then this next page is this my first time to be in a group? Or here's some information and questions I have. So guys, if you have questions today, don't forget to stop out by the kiosk in the foyer. We have our group's directors there that will answer your questions. And once you submit this form, we will follow up with you within the next 7 days in a relational follow-up. So guys, the bottom line is this. This is one of the greatest decisions you can make. I want to encourage you as much as I can to step into making this decision because, again, ultimately what we long for in life, that joy, contentment, happiness, and meaning is found when we intentionally prioritize these front porch relationships. So let me pray for us, and then we'll wrap it up. Father, thank you so much for this moment that we can connect like this and talk about relationships and how important they are in our lives. Father, I pray for the courage and I pray for the wisdom for all of us to take this step, to trust you and engage in environments that perhaps will create these front porch relationships that have such influence in our lives. Thank you for this moment. In Jesus' name, amen. Guys, thanks so much for being here. I'll see you next week.